is the Rape Kit panel, The Power of Truth, and we have a great panel here today. And I'm so excited. I'm sorry for the late start and technical delays, but that's okay. This is the script conference and we just go with it, right? So we are doing these mini panels to give free training to everybody out there so that people can come in and get free training about different topics, but also do prevention. And this year's theme is leadership. So we are taking leadership of this topic, and we have such a wonderful array of people to talk to you and also get information on this. But before I go on, I want the panel to introduce themselves. So we're going to start with Paul, because he is right in front of me, and go on and introduce yourself.
Good evening, everyone, and good evening to the audience that's tuning in this evening. Thank you for having me. My name is Paul Acosta, and I am the Assistant Chief of Police over in the Miami Beach Police Department, way on the East Coast. And I'm about a 30-year law enforcement career professional. I was born and raised in New York City. At the tender age of 17, I left and became a United States Marine, and decided to give my life to service of my country and to my fellow to my community. My experience throughout my law enforcement career is a variety of different levels of experience, from patrol to investigations, and of course through promotional processes up the chain to the rank of assistant chief. I've had the privilege to attend all sorts of leadership schools, to include the prestigious FBI National Academy in Quantico, Virginia, Senior Management Institute for Policing in at Boston University, just to name a few. But I hope that I can bring some level of experience and some knowledge to the panel today on this very important discussion.
Is it me, Dr. Warner?
Yeah.
Okay.
Let's go on to Kandee Lewis, if you can introduce yourself.
So good afternoon, everyone. I'm Kandee Lewis, Executive Director of Positive Results Center. We are a nonprofit and we address trauma from a cultural and age perspective. We specialize in teen dating, domestic, interpersonal, and intimate partner violence, sexual assault, and bullying. I am a certified domestic violence advocate, certified sexual assault crisis counselor, as well as a bully awareness and prevention expert. I also, oh my goodness, there's so much that we do. We are located in Los Angeles, and we cover pretty much everywhere in Southern California, as well as nationally when called. We do healthy relationship workshops and leadership development. And I have partnerships with the Sisters of Color Ending Sexual Assault, CalCASA, the Women of Color Network, and we work with youth to help them to be peer advocates and leaders. And there's so much more, but that's a good start.
That is a good start. And last but not least, our Tristin Engels, who this whole thing is about with her book, The Power of Truth. So please, Tristin, introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Tristin Engels. I'm a clinical forensic psychologist, and I'm also the maternal granddaughter of Louis Arvatulo, who co-invented the Rape Kit. I'm from Chicago originally, and I have been working in forensic populations for over 10 years now. I've worked with juveniles in the justice system. I've worked with adults in incarcerated maximum security prisons. I've worked with probation, parole, veterans, you name it. I've kind of worked the spectrum. So nice to meet you. Thank you for being here.
Awesome. Okay, so let me give you a little bit of ground rules for this. As you can see, we had some technical difficulties. That's because somebody's cell phone was on. So please make sure you're muted when you're talking, when you're not talking. When you are talking, then you can unmute yourself. If you have something to say, you can use your emojis or you can put it in the chat. But while the presenters are speaking, please mute yourself and please make sure there's no other people having distractions behind you so people are distracted. We are live streaming on Facebook and we are also recording this. So if you missed something, you can also go to the Listen and Love channel and you can watch this again or share it, which is what we would love to do. So without further ado, we're going to go right into our topic. And at the end, we're going to have a Q&A, and then also our panelists are going to give you also their information to be in contact with them when we're done. But the first question that I have, and we'll go in a round robin fashion, and we can also play off each other. That's how this is going to be. What are rape kits, and why are they so important in your area of expertise? So what are rape kits and why are they so important in your area of expertise? And who wants to take a stab at that first? Tristin?
I'll go with this one. So the rape kit is a standardized evidence collection kit that's used to collect evidence for victims after they've been assaulted so that they can use it in the investigation to identify the offender. It's been, for my expertise as a psychologist, I've worked with both survivors of assault and also the offenders. And what I found is that it helps bring justice on both spectrums for the survivor, obviously, but also in the offender. We found that testing backlogged rape kits actually helps us identify wrongly accused. And then also there's the family legacy component of my grandfather was the first inventor of it. And here's the original. I thought I'd share that with everybody.
Amazing.
Oh, wow. Okay, what's inside of that kit?
So first it was named after him. So it was the Vitullo Evidence Collection Kit was the original name. And it was given, the copyrights were given to the Citizens Committee for Victim Assistance, which was a Chicago-based organization for victims founded by Martha Goddard. So Martha Goddard was a survivor who approached my grandfather, who was becoming a forensic expert in the field in Chicago, to help find a way to standardize the way that they investigate sexual crimes. So they came up with this. And inside there's instructions, and in order, everything has to be done in an orderly fashion to ensure reliability and validity. And then there's just a series of cotton swabs, vials, everything is compartmentalized and labeled. There's contents, there's, you know, a comb, there's microscope slides that are, everything is sealed and labeled so that nothing can be cross-contaminated. And then there's also forms, so release of information, allowing it to be released to law enforcement. There's, you know, the physical exam. There's stuff for antibiotics, testing for pregnancy, and all of that goes in here, and it's handed over, signed off on, and given to law enforcement.
Wow. I mean, that's amazing. And there's so much history in that, because I know that that's changed over time, right? So Paul, why don't you go next and tell us what this means for your field?
Well, it's one of the most important components in what we do in law enforcement. You know, we can't investigate sexual assault kits without a rape kit. That's one of the most important components of an investigation for us. You know, everything that's inside of a rape kit contributes towards that evidence collection. Now, we look at a crime scene in a variety of different ways. And in the cases of sexual assaults, we look at the human body as a potential crime scene. And one of the most important things for a victim of a sexual assault to do is to essentially participate or to submit to a forensic examination. Anything that we collect from a law enforcement perspective in that forensic examination is huge towards the prosecution of a case. And one thing I wanted to point out was that, you know, quite often victims of crimes, of sexual assault crimes, don't initially report to law enforcement that they are a victim of a sexual assault. And they and the audience must know that, God forbid, if they're a victim of a sexual assault, that one of the most important things to do is within 72 hours is to go and get this examination done, because at some point in the future, they may change their mind. And that evidence has been preserved at that point in time. And that's going to be huge for us when we look into the case and begin our investigation. So I urge our viewers, if they, you know, information and knowledge is power, share with folks, have these types of conversations about the importance of a rape kit. It is, you know, not just the crime scene of where it occurred, but the actual human body is so important to preserve what occurred.
And Kandee?
Thank you. So rape kits are seriously important simply because the collection of evidence is necessary in order to bring a criminal to trial and to justice for the victim. If we do not have a rape kit, that means we don't have evidence. And if you don't have evidence, you can't prosecute. So it's critical that people understand the importance of a rape kit. Very often, people who are victimized, and you are a victim when someone abuses your body and they rape you. And understand this. Let me just first say a couple of things. This conversation may be triggering. And I want everyone to know that in the event something like this has happened to you, my first thing I want to let you know is I'm very sorry that that has happened to you. Second, I do want to let you know that it is not your fault, no matter what has happened, no matter where you were, no matter what you did. It was never your fault. It is always about the person who perpetrated the violence. And so very often we think that first thing you want to do is go home and wash this all off. But you have to maintain the importance and the integrity of the evidence so that when this person is caught, that you'll be able to receive justice and they'll be able to be tried for the violence and the abuse that they have perpetrated against you. So that's why a rape kit is important.
And also one thing that I want to say is that people often call people victims, and it's a language thing, but they're survivors because they're resilient and they survive something and they're going on in their lives. And that gives them the power back from what was taken from them because they're persevering in life. And so I want to commend people, if this has happened to you, that you are a survivor and you are a champion. And so, I always say that because people forget how powerful, those words can be for somebody. Right.
And the reason that I use victim in this particular case is because I want the law enforcement, I want the courts, I want the people that are in the trials to understand that this person was victimized. That is the important thing, because if they don't feel like that person was victimized, they may not give justice to it. And you're right, you are a survivor. Anything that you have survived from, that you are still living, even if you are in pain, even if you are still triggered by certain things, you are definitely a survivor and you have strength. And we want to make sure that we put the onus and the responsibility on the person who has perpetrated the crime against you.
Absolutely. And that brings us to, our next question. From your background and expertise, why are there so many wrong convictions? And what does that do for the survivor and the victim accused? I mean, both of them, right, are being victimized, right? And then there's no justice, and then they're giving the wrong justice to the wrong person, right? So answer that. I mean, what do you think?
I'll start it off. That's a very touchy subject sometimes, and quite frankly, we have to face it. There historically has been miscarriages of justice, misconduct in government. I'll give you an example. Across America, there are a lot of small towns, and when a small town is affected by a heinous crime, such as a sexual assault, sometimes there's pressure, undue and not rightfully, but there's pressure on law enforcement and on government to come up with an arrest in a particular case. And sometimes there's not just enough evidence in that particular case to bring a lawful prosecution. And sometimes folks push the envelope. And it's unfortunate, and that's why we have networks like the Innocence Project and things of that nature that look into these types of cases. And that should never happen. That should never happen to the victim who thinks that they're going to get justice in the end, and also the perpetrator of a crime. There's also things that happen in a case investigation, like false confessions. Quite often, a person that's not aware of the process, perhaps not aware entirely of what their confession would lead to, sometimes through an interrogation process, perhaps hours on end, we'll decide that the best thing and the benefit to them would be to simply, oh, let me just confess to this so I can get out of this world right now and just go home. And perhaps they'll be lenient on me in some cases, but they really don't know the ramifications of what they're doing in some cases. And that leads to wrongful convictions, unfortunately. And that's the thing sometimes that we have to face in the world of law enforcement and government.
I'll add to that. I know in a lot of the wrongful convictions that I have researched when I was writing my book and just following the Innocence Project as well, because they specifically take on cases where DNA evidence can exonerate somebody. And a lot of those cases are related to rapes or sexual assault. And what we found is that in the trial, the assault that took place decades ago, a rape kit may have been conducted, but it was never tested. And so law enforcement feels the pressure from the community to pin it on somebody. And a lot of times they go with somebody that they might already have trouble with or want to pin it on. And a lot of times that person is a marginalized or person of color. And they find themselves being convicted of the crime, even though they didn't commit it. And there's DNA evidence that could have been used and tested to exonerate them from that crime that they didn't. And so now when we're addressing the backlog, we're finding that the DNA from those kits does not match the person that was convicted of the crime. And so the Innocence Project comes in and tries to do the exoneration. But even once they prove that, it still can take years before it goes in front of a court and they overturn the conviction. So I think there's a multicultural component to it.
There's definitely a multicultural component to it, given the fact that very often when you are looking at crimes of violence, people of color are often looked at and sought after, even if the ID does not even match who that person was. Recently, there was a case of mistaken identity with a man who was arrested for sexual assault and battery. And the evidence, the witness statement said that a white man in this area did this and they arrested an African-American man. Also, as Dr. Engels said, very often when the police are looking for someone and the height of this crime, everyone is trying to make sure that a rapist is off the streets. And so there's a lot of pressure on law enforcement and district attorneys to make sure that they bring a case to trial. And so they will look to see who fits this background, even if they don't necessarily look like that person. And the reason is when you are traumatized and you've just experienced this violent thing that happened to you, very often you may not remember or even give the correct information about what that person looks like. We've seen very often that you could bring 5 people who were right at the scene of a crime, and each one of them is going to say something completely different because the way you see it, based on how you are feeling, what's going on, what has happened before, if you were traumatized because of it, if you were the victim, will lead you to say something else. So there's many reasons why someone might be convicted or accused wrongly of a crime, but a lot of times it is because that person is of color or they have a background and a history of violence or interactions with the law enforcement, or also simply because someone has said something that is so wrong and misidentified someone.
And I'm so glad that you talked about how traumatized people categorize things differently, because it does happen, right? All of this cortisol is being released in your brain. And when that happens, then your pictures aren't set right? You don't get the same thing and you don't remember things in a linear fashion. So what happens is you remember them in pieces and pieces and pieces, and it could seem like the person's lying and they're not. That's why evidence is so important over someone saying something, especially if they're traumatized at the moment. And also you're going to remember things according to your social norming. So if you've been social normed that these type of people are bad, you're going to immediately go there. There's so much research on that. right? So Paul, I know you want to say something.
You read my mind, right? You know me well.
I can see your face.
Yeah. So what I was thinking in some of the things that you said and Kandee said as well, the mind is like, people think that the mind is, records events like a tape recorder. And during moments of trauma, that is hard to do. And therefore, when an investigation begins, it's very important to capture what that person remembers at the time that this incident occurred, because it's so traumatic to them. And one of the most important things we do and we have to do with victims of sexual assault is develop a rapport right from the very beginning. Quite often, the basic patrol officer may not be as empathetic, as concerned, and therefore we lose that ability to develop a rapport and provide to the victim the understanding of what the process will be along the way. And that's why it's important. And what we do at our agency is link up a victim advocate with the victim of a crime, so that there's comfort, so that there's understanding, so that there's an explanation of what is ahead of that particular victim, and to be empathetic and to be understanding of what they are experiencing psychologically with this particular trauma. So all of those things are important. And I think laying the foundation at the very beginning of an investigation is important to the successful outcome of the particular crime. And like I said, the rapport leads to the confidence and the trust that obtaining a rape kit along the way in that investigation is something that a victim should do and must do in these types of cases.
I'm so glad you said that, because when Martha Goddard and my grandfather met, the whole reason why she approached my grandfather about standardizing evidence collection in sexual assault cases was because she herself was a survivor, and she notified law enforcement. And law enforcement decided that they weren't going to follow up or investigate this case because they did not believe that she appeared distressed or traumatized enough, having just been victimized. And that is not an appropriate measure or a viable measure of determining whether or not somebody is credible. And it's not their job to do that. They're supposed to initiate that rape kit collection and take those crimes very seriously. And that's part of the rapport. I think there's a lot of women and out there, and men too, who in a situation like that might have some fear about whether or not they'll be believed. And this is why this is such an underreported crime.
Yeah, and I agree with you, Doctor. I'm sorry, Kandee, you go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say briefly that I agree with her, because, for us in the law enforcement world, developing that rapport, like I mentioned earlier, is just so important. It's one of the most key parts of an investigation that we could go into. I'll transfer it over to you, Kandee, so I can formulate my thought and finish it up.
It's okay. So I really want to say, we're have the reverb going on. Okay, so I'm gonna say,
and whoever's phone is on, please mute yourself. There we go. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so what I was gonna say is, and that just kind of messed me up. Very often, especially being a woman or even a man who has been raped, it seems like the responsibility of telling the story and your truth and being believed is on us, when the responsibility should not be for us to prove that we were raped. But that is how it comes across. So as a woman, we are seen very often as sexual beings. And so there's that question of, well, is this something you really had a relationship with somebody, or you had sex with them and then you felt guilty later on, and so you're trying to blame them? Or were you out drinking, or what were you wearing? The conversation is just so demeaning and disgusting to women. And then I know some men that I have worked with who have been raped, and the police will look at them and even have laughed and said, you can't possibly be a rape victim. Who raped you? You know, because it's that, oh, you're a man, you should do it kind of thing. And so those kinds of conversations hold people back. If, especially if you are a person of color, a woman of color, and you have a background, whether that background is maybe gang affiliated, or if you have done something before, maybe you stole something. And so they look at you like, you couldn't have possibly done this. Also, let me say this. I work with a group of people, of just all different kind of people who are beautiful. But people will sometimes say that certain people are not beautiful, and even use this horrible word called ugly. And this one person told me that a police officer said, well, who would rape you? And it is not. That is so disgusting that we have to remember that rape is not a crime of passion. Rape is violence. Rape is about power and control. So rapists will rape anyone from an infant to a senior person. And so to categorize a person, especially a woman, by her size, by her color, by the way she looks, everyone is beautiful and everyone should be treated with respect and dignity.
Kandee, you're absolutely right. I wanted to go down a path earlier with Dr. Engels on something that she touched on. You know, education and training is huge, and the prioritization of the investigation of sexual assaults and the development of policy by strong leaders in the organizations is important. If we don't set policy that provides guidelines and how to connect with people that are victims of these types of crimes when we initially meet them, and not educate our police officers, then they're going to continue to be callous when they come across these victims and they meet them. They're not going to understand and see the signs of what they're trying to describe to them in this particular crime. And I think it's incumbent upon all of us that training continue, that dialogue continue, and communication about what these signs are, and not to be so callous and not believing and trustworthy of the victims in this particular case. If there's anything that, you know, there's all types of crimes, all types of violent crimes that are committed across this country every day. But this has to be one of the most horrific things that can happen to a human being, both male and female, right? Is the violation of their body, because they're never going to get that sanctity back, that sense of cleanliness and wholesomeness back. They've been violated. Someone took that from them. They are now traumatized. In a lot of cases, they develop PTSD in these cases. Sometimes through the process of going through court and prosecution, all of these bad memories are relived. This is something that there has to be more conversation about, more awareness. And in fact, I remembered that April is Sexual Assault Awareness Month, right? So we got to remember all these victims, the hundreds of thousands of victims of sexual assaults, and never forget them and what they've gone through, and also share what those signs are of these sexual assaults and these bad environments, these bad relationships that, quite frankly, you know, in some cases develop into these heinous crimes.
And
Yeah,
I'm so glad.
Go ahead, Kandee.
Okay, I'm so glad you spoke about April being Sexual Assault Awareness Month. It is critical that we have these conversations. Let me just say to you, if anyone has any experience or knowledge about rape, share that. If you are in a place that you feel comfortable and it has happened to you, share that. And because it is important that people understand that rape could happen to anyone. It is not a person's fault. And we have to educate children. We have to educate law enforcement, youth serving agencies, hospitals, doctors, people. Because very often, another reason that sometimes people aren't believed is because when you are sexually assaulted or raped or abused in some kind of form or fashion, your body is immediately traumatized, And everyone shows differently. So you might go in and you might be very calm. And so people are saying, well, wait a minute, this just happened to you, but you're that calm. Or you might be screaming and hollering and completely out of control. And when that happens, especially if you're a person of color, they're like, wait, hold on, calm down. And when something happens to you and you are on that side, it's difficult to calm down. Or maybe you don't even have the words to express what has happened to you. But I do want to say this, if it has happened to you, again, this is not your fault. And to make sure that you create in your mind a place where you could say to yourself, I know I want to take a shower. I want to get this mess off of me, but I need to preserve the sanctity of the evidence so that I can get this person convicted and get this person off the streets.
Can I say something really quick on that?
Go ahead, Paul.
I just want to say that, the messaging that we got to get out there is important. A lot of people don't know that rape kits are available to them, that they can go and get this done, and that I have to preserve what just occurred to me. They don't know that. So I think the messaging out there is important to victims of these types of crimes, and we just got to talk about it a lot more.
Yeah, and Tristin, to bring this back to you, because you did all this research on the rape kit, I want people to go do this, but also people need to know that this is also for a survivor to go and have this done. It's also very intrusive to the body, right? But once it's done, like, and especially if you get a right conviction, you feel so validated, right? But Tristin, can you talk about that and like how this process works and what this means? Because I don't think a lot of people know this.
Yeah, I think it's I think Paul had mentioned it before, and there's really no easy way of sharing it, but you are the crime scene. Your body is the crime scene. And so it's treated as such when you have to go in for forensic evidence. So when you have a rape kit done, it can take anywhere from 6 to 8 hours, depending on the severity of the assault. But they take evidence from every possible area. They collect your clothes, they comb through hair, they do swabs. It can take 6 to 7 hours, even longer. And they take breaks too. They have to test your urine, they have to check for STDs if you're pregnant. It's very intrusive. There's photographing, but the bigger tragedy is if they go through doing that and the rape kit is not tested, that is a complete miscarriage of justice for the survivor. What is that sending somebody? Or what message does that send to go through all of that, re-victimize yourself, tell the story all over again, to provide that evidence to secure justice, and then have it sit on evidence lockers?
Muted you, Paul, because you were echoing. Sorry. Now
I'm sorry. No, that's okay. That's okay. I just wanted to say that I have wonderful victim advocates that work for our organization with a variety of different experience. And one of the things I learned from them is that at the Rape Treatment Center in Miami, Florida, an interview that is conducted at the very beginning with this forensic examiner is important, because they go into great detail about what happened. And there are certain levels of forensic collection that occurs. As an example, if the violation or the type of crime is alleged to be, and forgive me for the words that I'm about to use, but let's just say it was a sexual assault involving oral sex as an example, and nothing else, then the doctors here or the forensic examiners are very careful in how they collect evidence. They would focus in around the mouth as an example, and not be so intrusive in other parts of the body. So that helps with how quickly they go through that process of forensic collection. And number two, the analysis of the rape kit down the line by the lab you know, how quickly does that rape kit and the evidence from it get turned around? If they have to collect a variety of evidence that's really not important in the crime that occurred by way of the investigation and the questions being asked initially, then they can get answers rather quickly. All right. And it's not as intrusive, again, to that particular victim. You're not, you know, swabbing other areas of the body that are not relevant in a particular case.
I think in Miami, correct me if I'm wrong, you guys a contract with the rape treatment center. So you send the survivor straight to the treatment center for the kit to be collected. But in other states, they don't, not especially in lower income areas, the law enforcement agencies don't really have those contracts. So the survivor or the victim in that case has to go to an emergency room to have a rape kit completed. But in some states, you require a forensic certification to actually conduct the rape kit on a victim. So in some of those areas, they don't have a forensically certified nurse or physician on staff on the shift at the time that that person would go in to have one conducted, leaving them to be turned away to go home, to have to sit in that even longer, to then go back. And so that's an area we really need to start talking about and focusing on and addressing going forward.
And that's called trauma. You have trauma on top of trauma on top of trauma. First off, something terrible, probably the worst thing that could ever happen to you in your entire life has happened. And then you get the strength and the courage to go and report it, only to be told that you can't report or you can't provide the information or have someone assist you at that time. The likelihood of you going back is very small because you feel diminished. You feel like, okay, every little bit of strength that you now have after someone has taken the most precious thing from you, because once someone has touched you, you are still beautiful, you are still fabulous, but you are forever changed. Your safety, the feeling that you can accomplish everything has now been compromised because someone has stolen the most precious part of you. And I want to bring this conversation in that there's a question, there's a comment in the chat that people aren't believed simply because something has happened to you by someone that you've known. Whether it is a longtime friend, a trusted, let's say, faith leader, educator, neighbor, or in this particular case, it's your spouse. And so they want to know what are the statistics on the number of victims that haven't reported. There's no information on that. What I can tell you that in the United States, every 8 seconds, that's every 8 seconds, a woman is sexually assaulted. Now, that is a woman. That means that she is over 12 years old, and that's only in the United States. And so it becomes, when you start thinking about the larger scale, that a lot of people aren't reporting because they are not going to be believed, or because the person who has assaulted them is threatening them, or any other number of reasons. So we know that those numbers are seriously screwed, that they're probably every 4 seconds someone is being sexually assaulted, or if not every second, because violence is just, it is overwhelming. We are in a pandemic, and I'm not talking about COVID-19. I am talking about sexual assault and domestic violence has been a pandemic for the longest. And so it is important that we have the conversations, that we educate not only the children and the parents and the law enforcement and the hospitals and the schools and everyone else, and constantly have conversation to make sure that people understand that the violence that was perpetrated against someone was not their fault, and they should not be held accountable, that we should make sure that we get these rape kits and reduce that backlog.
Tristin, is it 1 in every 4 seconds? I know that you had mentioned that before.
1 in every 4 seconds.
that someone is assaulted?
I thought it was once every 90 seconds, but it's 1 in every 8 seconds, as Kandee was saying, and that's
Oh,
in the
wow.
United States.
That is insane. And I also know that it's 1 in every 6 men that is abused, and people don't believe that. And it's actually more than that, because men don't often report for all the reasons that we're talking about, right? And so one of the things that we have to do is, when we hear someone and they say this, the first thing I always tell people to do is shut your mouth and listen, right? The second thing I do is that I say, I believe you. Then the next thing I do is say, it's not your fault. And then the last thing I do is say, thank you for telling me that. And then I say, this is how I'm going to act on it.
Right. That's so important. Especially if someone in your family comes to you and says, a member of our family did this to me. I think that is if it's very difficult for anybody to share with a family member if they have been sexually abused or assaulted by a family member, because that it's hard for them to want to believe and accept that. And it's really important that if any member of your family comes to you with this information, that you do exactly what you said, and not get mad, not get disbelief, not be be in denial about it. Listen, take it in, and and tell them you believe them, because if you get angry, if you get outward, then they're going to feel responsible for your reaction, and they're already feeling responsible for the assault against them when they shouldn't.
And then they learn to be responsible for other people's feelings on their violation.
Exactly.
And
that's what it means.
Especially if they're a child, it starts down this path, and then it blows up, right? And just to let you guys know, I see all the wonderful things in the chat. At the end, we're gonna have 30 minutes to ask all these questions of all the experts. So thank you, Kandee, for kicking that off. And also familial rape and also spousal rape. Right?
It's a thing.
And people don't realize you can be, right? And
you can go to prison for spousal rape. You
absolutely can, but that law changed. It didn't used to be, right? But they also, I mean, they have so many laws. I mean, they had laws about wearing high heels, and there's so many laws on the books that you would not believe are laws, okay?
And there was for a long time, rape was defined as insertion of a penis into a vagina, or there was this one case about this woman who thought her partner was in the bed with her and it was someone else, and then they said that she wasn't raped because she actually did it, but she did it not knowing that that was the person. But I want to just uplift one thing Dr. Engels said. If a child comes to you and they tell you that this has happened to them, make sure you fix your face, because children are visual. And so you might say, well, tell me what happened so that I can handle this. They see your face, they see that you are upset, and they think that you are upset with them because they are children. And so you have to make sure that you, first off, get down to a level where they are, sit in a chair and put everything down. If you are on your cell phone, if you're cooking, whatever it is, stop and look at them and let them know that, okay, tell me whatever it is, and I'm okay, and I'm going to make sure that I help you. Make sure you're using language that is appropriate, that children will understand. Make sure that you calm your voice down. Make sure that anything that they tell you, you just repeat it and say, okay, okay. And as you said, Dr. Deborah, I trust you, I believe you, and I'm going to take care of this, and I'm going to make sure that this doesn't happen to you again. Please don't say, they would never do that.
Right. Oh, no.
How do we believe strangers over our own children?
Absolutely. But I want to bring Paul into this discussion as law enforcement and see what he has to say about this.
You know, I have a couple of things to say about it. I have 2 of my daughters that are participating here and listening in on this discussion. And I extended the invitation because I thought it was important as they're growing. One of them is an adult and one is soon to be an adult. You know, it's been difficult. It's a difficult ride for daddy. And even in my world in law enforcement and knowing what's right and what to say, it's also been difficult for me to have those one-on-one conversations with them about the birds and the bees. So I urge any of our viewers that might be on, don't do what I've done. Don't make that mistake. Have those difficult conversations with your daughters as they're growing up, because not the birds and the bees is one component of it, but violation of trust and love and violation of the human body can also occur. Quite often people don't think and understand that, when they're engaged in sexual activity with somebody and at some point, a person says no, that means no. Even if that person is known to you, even if it's a spouse, boyfriend, however long, it does not matter. And that brings me to the investigative side of it in law enforcement. Our special victims detectives, we have a unique unit, a very special unit. And I think that as these folks retire out, the succession plan is very important because they're very loving, caring, compassionate. They know how to connect our victim advocates and bring them in at the right time initially in these investigations. They don't approach these investigations with prove to me you were a victim of a sexual assault before I believe you. No, they go in quite the opposite, with open hearts, open minds, open ears, comforting, and they provide an environment so they can divulge everything that they've experienced. Dealing with children and the forensic interviews that we partner with, oh boy, I forgot the name of the agency that we partner with, but it is so important for them to go through this process, because when you're dealing with children, it's much different than dealing with an adult. The signs and the revelation of the trauma that they experience is much different. Quite often, if it's a family member, it's difficult for them to divulge that information to law enforcement, but through these forensic investigations and interviews, we get to the bottom of it. And we got very, very experienced detectives. And if there's one thing that I could share with any law enforcement agency across the country, is that invest in your people, educate your people. If you're going to assign them to these types of units, sexual special victims, make sure that they are the right person for that particular unit and educate those folks, because they're going to come across a variety of sexual assaults that they really need to understand the signs that are in front of them.
Can I just
say, and Paul, you're at the Rape Treatment Center. That's the name that you forgot.
Yes, ma'am. But there's also one for the children.
Okay.
For the children, in which it's more of an interview. A doctor sits with them. They sit on the floor. They have dolls and animals, and they talk through what occurred, and they get to the bottom of it through that forensic interview. So I can't remember it right now. I apologize.
And I just want to say one thing and pass it to Dr. Engels. Paul said consent, that if you say yes and then you say no, no means no. But let me just also lift this up. If you say yes and you are in the middle of anything, at any point you can take your consent back and say no. So if you are engaging in some form of sex and then you say, well, no, I don't want to do this anymore, or I don't want to do this or this, and you say no, no means no, and they must stop. So, and the last part is, Paul, thank you for bringing in your daughters, but everybody, let's bring in our sons too, so that they will understand what is consent, what's boundaries, what's good and what's not, and that sex, love, relationships has nothing to do with violence.
Tristin, Dr. Engels?
Yeah, I just think the biggest takeaway for that is, even if you're in a committed relationship, whether it's a marriage or a committed partnership, just because you've committed to that person doesn't mean you've given continued consent at all times. So consent is always a thing, regardless of the circumstance.
Paul, do you have a last comment before I take the next question?
I was just going to say I noticed that my son logged in. So Kandee, my son, my 19-year-old boy is here, who also, as Dr. Deborah knows, wants to be an FBI agent at some point in his life. So I thought that this discussion was important for him as well.
Thank you so much. Yes, we need more men to join in on this discussion.
Hi, Brandon.
Absolutely. Thank you, Brandon. And, you know, can I just say one thing? One of the things that we do here in Los Angeles, we have a lot of parents that feel uncomfortable having conversations with your kids. So whether you are in Los Angeles or anywhere in the world, because we have virtual, contact us and we will have those conversations with your kids, with your young adults, and we will have them age appropriate, especially for our boys. We do workshops for boys, just simply boys, especially those that are about to leave and go away to college, because there's a lot of rape that happens on college campuses simply because you're away from home for the first time. You're also drinking, using drugs, hanging out with the wrong people, or sometimes it just happens like, okay, this happened and one thing led to another, and rape should never happen. But if you don't know, if you aren't given the tools in order to make sure that it doesn't happen, it will. So if you are afraid to have the conversation, call us.
And Kandee, that brings up the next question. And the next question is there anything currently being done that can be used to assist in making this a better process? Because just doing those rape kits takes 6 to 7 hours, right? But talking, I mean, what is it we can do in the community to make this better for people to report and also for people to interact with survivors in this fashion?
So one of the things that we do, we go around to hospitals and we have conversations with the OBGYNs and we help them to understand what trauma looks like. So for instance, if we're talking about, let's say, domestic violence, very often people don't come to us and say, I'm in an abusive relationship. They will come and say, I need money for food or housing or something else. So you have to really not only listen to the person, but also watch them for different signs and ask questions that will be appropriate to the conversation. So people will give you signs, people want to share, but they just don't know how. And with youth and young adults, we go into schools, churches, community groups. We do them virtually now. When we have the opportunity, we will go back and do it in person, or we can do it virtually. And so our conversations, I love our conversations with our high school and people about to go into college, because we have real talk conversation. People like to sugarcoat it and make it look pretty. Make sure that you don't touch any part of the body, or make sure you don't do this. When kids learn differently, they talk differently, and you don't want a child to walk out of the room saying, what were they talking about? Just be straight up. If you're having sex, you want to say the words penis and vagina. Don't say butterfly. Don't say yanni. Don't say all those other things. Make sure you're using the words and have a real conversation. And answer, for those that have young kids, answer the questions that they ask you, and then ask them if they have any other questions. You don't have to expand on anything. Just answer the question and then ask if they have other questions.
I think another thing that can be done is we know, and part of why, you know, I wrote my book, and a portion of each sale goes towards ending the backlog of untested rape kits, because there is an extensive backlog, is finding out what in your state might be causing or contributing to that backlog and writing to your senators about what can be done with that. So if it's a funding issue, or if it's, for example, not having a crime lab that's contracted, or you know, and then the other aspect of the forensic certificate at hospitals and not having enough staff to complete the kits. Those are things that as community members, you could actively get involved in by writing to your senators to get some legislation in your state.
That's a very good point, Doctor. And I just want to add from the law enforcement perspective, I think there needs to be a broader development of policy and how law enforcement approaches sexual assault cases. You know, larger agencies have the benefit of having funding, the ability to send officers to training, focus in on this particular type of crime and things of that nature. But strong leaders need to develop strong policies so that a detective that's faced with this type of investigation doesn't go out on his or her own and think that they know what they're doing is best in this particular case. Well, what do I do with this rape kit? When do I send it off to the lab? Do we have a lab to send it off to? How long do I hold on to it? Those are all things that sometimes with smaller agencies, there's no consistency. So I think perhaps on a national level and through national organizations like the International Associations of Chiefs of Police, perhaps there needs to be the development of a consistent, unique, across the board, the same kind of policies throughout. Now we have an organization called CALEA, which is a small percentage of law enforcement agencies around the country have a standardization of policies that are best practices in law enforcement. And not every agency is CALEA certified. I would mandate, if I was the boss of all bosses across the United States, right, that every agency be CALEA certified. That way, you know that if you travel to Arkansas or New York City or Miami, if God forbid something happened to you, your case in this particular event of sexual assault is going to be handled the same way so that at the end of the day, there's a successful arrival at a prosecution. And we don't have that, whether it be the lack of agency or policy development, knowledge, gaps in training. We just don't have that consistency across the board with 18,000 law enforcement agencies across the country. I would say that we need to communicate that a little bit more and move towards in that direction.
Yeah, and some of the research I've done and part of what contributed to the backlog is in certain areas, once a rape kit was completed, it was up to the investigator and at their discretion as to whether or not they even wanted to send it to the crime lab for processing. And in some cases, the survivors would say that they chose not to because they felt that it wasn't a credible case. And so they opted not to test the rape kit. And so now we have this backlog, which, I talk a lot about in my book as well, how it actually develops, how, there's a whole lot of variables as to why it has gotten as big as it has, but there's no rationale or excuse for why it persists anymore.
If I can add something to that, we experienced in Miami not long ago, perhaps a couple of years ago, where there was a backlog here. And it took grant funding for that crime lab to come on board and begin testing all these rape kits. And lo and behold, these cases that have been on the shelf, so to speak, for years are now getting hits. And now people are being brought to justice. And while that's great in one aspect, it's also traumatizing in the other, because now perhaps that particular victim is now moving on and psychologically perhaps is doing better or in a better place, now has to relive that. And in those particular cases, for example, what we do, we develop the policy and a process where if we have to revisit a cold case for whatever the reason, we have that victim advocate connected with that detective from the very beginning, and resources in whatever state they may be in, because they may not be from South Florida as an example, they may be from California. And we prearrange resources in that particular area for that victim and have them ready to go whenever we make connection with them and talk to them about this particular hit that we were able to receive from the DNA analysis. So
do you do that throughout active cases as well? Because I know some of the survivors have shared that, while they're waiting for the rape kit to be tested and it's been years, they're not getting any follow-up or updated information from the investigator. So they're just kind of left in the cold for years, not knowing, which is another traumatizing aspect.
I would venture to say that in years past that may have occurred, for as an example, in South Florida. But right now, because we don't have a backlog anymore, my conversation with our crime scene supervisor revealed that our turnaround in getting results back is about 38 days. And that's great because there's now, that process is moving along for the victim in that case or our survivor in this particular case. So that's huge, because they need to know that they're not forgotten. And part of that is the analysis of that rape kit.
I wish every law enforcement agency were acting with diligence such as yours, Paul. Thank you so much for that. Thank you so much for that, for every person who has ever experienced this, because the longer it takes, you feel so many different things, in anything from pain and anguish, anxiety, anger, depression, just pissed off that this has happened to you and no one is doing anything. So I think we ought to just clone your agency, clone you and your team, and have you go all across the country and train people. Earlier, Dr. Engels talked about advocating your elected officials and making sure that they know that this is important, because this is really about who's going to get the most sound bites. So if you are not talking about this, if you are not advocating about it, they don't think it's important. And women are looked at as commodities. We've always been looked at commodities. For the longest, we had no say-so, we had no agency over our own bodies. And it's still true today. So we must advocate, speak up, contact your elected officials and do your research. So if you were concerned about this, find out what's going on in your own county. I'm concerned, I'm always talking to not only law enforcement, but my elected officials. Why are there no rape crisis centers in South Los Angeles? None, not a single one. We have to go to Compton, Santa Monica, or downtown Los Angeles. But there's a high number of rapes. Even during COVID, a lot of kids were raped during COVID. A lot of women were raped, a lot of boys were raped, and a lot of men were raped. And so the trauma of that and not being able to have a rape crisis center, that is huge. So that lets you know that having a rape kit is not even important to them, much less the backlog. So thank you, Paul, for all the work that you do, for your team, for your diligence, your respect, your love and consideration.
But that brings us to the next question. In your opinion, right, what should the focus be of community collaboration on a national, and I hear Kandee saying even on a city level, on what to do about this? Because one of the things people do is that they don't want to talk about this, right? We've heard that several times today, right? Especially if it has to do with something really uncomfortable, has to do with boys, or people just don't like talk about any kind of assault in this way, right? But what do we need to do about this? And then I'm going to push you further. What do we need to do if the people are of color? Is that a difference? I'm just curious about the discussion, because we started talking about it, but we didn't expand on it, right? Because there's over 400,000 unprocessed rape kits, according to Dr. Engels.
That's actually according to endthebacklog.org, which is a charitable organization founded by Mariska Hargitay from Law and Order SVU. And that is an underreported number. In 2015, I was interviewed by CNN about that backlog and that number. And then in 2018, they followed up. And after that investigative report had been publicized, they followed up and saw that and Paul, you're probably going to really cringe when I say this, but some law enforcement agencies actually disposed of kits that hadn't even passed their statute of limitations to try to cover up the fact that they hadn't processed them. So I think there's a lot of things in the community that we need to start doing. Aside from talking about it openly, we need to start having a standardized way and we have the standardized method of collecting the evidence, but we need to standardize the way in which that we're we're actually completing the investigation. Like in Miami, it sounds like they have a really good system down, but in a lot of places, it sits on a shelf. There's no tracking system monitoring at a state level what they're doing with that kit once it's been collected. There's no standardized time frame that says you need to get this tested by X amount of time, and you have to, there's no one holding the state accountable. So maybe on a federal level we need a tracking system, and maybe that can also help by giving some donations or grants to the underserved communities to actually improve in these areas, like providing a rape crisis center in Compton.
And there is a rape crisis center in Compton, but it's the one in Compton, one in downtown Los Angeles, and one in Santa Monica. And the funding is critical. First off, funding for women and girls is so small. It is ridiculous. There's more funding. Let me just say this, and no disrespect to anyone. I am a dog lover. We have dogs. I've always had dogs. But when you look at violence against people and violence against animals, the number is crazy. So violence against people is here, and violence against animals is here as far as the financial support. People feel that if that happened to you, then you've played a role in that, and it is your responsibility and it was your fault. When the animal had no control, they had no say-so, they had no agency. But very often, let me take that back. Every single time violence has been perpetrated against a man or woman, a boy or girl, it was not their fault. It was someone else who did it, and they didn't have agency over it happening to them or not. Violence and abuse, especially when we're talking about rape or sexual assault, is a crime. It is a crime. And it is not about passion. It is not about love. It is not about sex. It is about power and control. It is also sometimes about mental illness. It is sometimes about alcohol and drugs. And it is usually always someone who feels like they should have what they want, and they're going to go and do whatever they want to do. So that is why I said earlier that you have to bring the boys and the girls in the conversation. Girls can rape, boys can rape, men can rape, and women can rape, and boys can be raped, girls can be raped, babies can be raped, seniors can be raped, but it is not their fault. And that's what we have to really remember, that it is not the person's fault who has experienced this. And then we must advocate to make sure that women and girls and boys and children receive the funding and the resources, that the law enforcement understands that yes, gang violence and theft and all these other things are important. But until we really take care of a person's physical, emotional body, their being, then they're going to be living in trauma, and that will affect everything that they do. So we must take care of people.
Paul, what do you think?
Tell you, Kandee and Dr. Engels, you guys hit on some very good points, and I appreciate listening to them. What I think that three things. One is that we have to take this crime seriously, and I don't think that it's taken seriously as compared to other major crimes that are investigated by law enforcement agencies. Once they do, and it takes, again, like I said before, strong leadership to make these types of cases a priority, then you're going to see the constant follow-up and the processing of rape kits in a timely manner. We talked, we've learned. The reason why we've gotten to the place we're at in South Florida is because we've learned through mistakes, right? So our rape kits do not stay impounded in our organization for more than 30 days. We make sure, because the case is developing, there's a lot of other things that are going on and other cases coming in, but we make sure that case is sent off for analysis no more than 30 days. The rule of thumb is when that kit comes back to our station impounded as evidence, the conversation and investigation goes on. The following day, that detective is taking it over. And I think those are some of the things that perhaps people need to emphasize and need to make a priority in their own organizations across the country. And also, it's all about constantly educating our victims, our survivors as well, our law enforcement officers, our state attorneys and prosecutors about every aspect of this particular crime. And I don't think there's a lot of conversation about it. And lastly is over-communicate the awareness about this crime and the different facets of how it can occur. And the fact that rape kits are available to victims, I think that's huge. We're going to see prosecutions go in a better way and handled in a better way as well.
I just want to lift
Dr.
up
Engels? Oh, can we see what Dr. Engels wants to say, and then we'll move on back to you because we're running out of time. Okay.
I think we hit on most of it. I think, though, to expand on one of your questions was, how does this change in terms of people of color? And I think that's where we really have to start focusing, because in the underserved areas is where we're finding that there's more of a backlog. They're not as believed. It's not taken as seriously. And the backlogs that, for example, Detroit, the city of Detroit, women had raised money. There was a group of women that did fundraising to test 10,000 backlogged rape kits in the city of Detroit. And of those 10,000, about somewhere between 600 and 800, I don't have the full number, but 600 to 800 of them were serial rapists. And these are decades old kits. So there were 600 to 800 serial rapists that were active within the last several decades that those kits had gone untested. And of those 600 to 800, only about 150 or so were able to be prosecuted because of statute of limitations. So that's another area to really focus on, is how do we address the underserved areas and make sure that we're prioritizing these crimes the way that we are in larger cities like Paul's area, and how we're prioritizing them as seriously as we are other crimes in those areas as well.
Kandee, take it home.
I just want to make sure that people are aware what a rape kit is and the importance of it. And I think there's not a lot of conversation about it. So you don't know about a rape kit until someone says the word rape kit. So if we educate people about what rape kits are, then I think more women will, as well as men, will also report, as well as once we put a little empathy into the conversation, there'll be more. But when we talk about communities of color, we have to get past the fact that communities of color are not different. People are people. It does not matter your race, how you identify, your sexual identity. It does not matter your size, your age, your financial background. It does not matter if you are a person who is in the sex trade, because all of these things still make you a person. And so we have to make sure that everyone is being held accountable and responsible for their actions, and that based on who a person is does not prohibit them from receiving any types of services. And I know for a fact not only here in Los Angeles, but all across the world, if you're looking at a woman, a person of color, and especially someone who has either been drinking or that is involved in the sex trade, that they will not be believed. And oftentimes people think that, well, that is what happens, or that's what you do, and you can't be raped. Yes, you absolutely, positively can. So let's start with educating our children, educating both girls and boys how to stay safe, use the correct terminology for our bodies, to make sure that people understand about this thing called boundaries, that no one has the right or the agency to touch you or to take anything from you without your permission, that they understand about being accountable and responsible for their actions, and that we hold people accountable. Let's not just say, well, because they are a person of the cloth, or because they have a lot of money, or they have some celebrity, or because you know them, that it is okay. It is never okay. We just have to continue to say it's never okay, and also make sure that we advocate for everyone.
Can I just add one thing? If you to help spread the word on what a rape kit is, you can always buy this, which is talking about my grandfather and how he came to invent it. It talks about what's in it. It talks about how it's used. It talks about the process, and portion of each sale goes towards ending this backlog and clearing it out and trying to find ways to make sure that the backlog doesn't persist.
Tristin, where can you get the book? Don't show it to me without telling me where I can buy it.
You can buy it on the publisher's website, Genius Books Publishing, or you can get it on Amazon or Barnes & Noble, anywhere you can purchase books.
And if you contact them, you can also get a signed copy, which I have two of,
Yes, you can.
right?
Yeah, you have to order it from the publisher's website. It's Genius Books Publishing. And there's a button on there for just a few dollars more where I can sign it for you and ship it out. So,
and if you forget where it is, you can always just contact me at the script conference or at drdeborahwarner.net, and I will send you Tristin's information. So we're going to move into questions now. We already have 2 in the chat. So I'm going to read the first one. It is for you, Dr. Engels, but other people can chime in after I read it. Okay. It says, Dr. Engels, that's one of the biggest problems here in Puerto Rico. The agency that handles rape kits don't have enough budget assigned, and the cases were taking longer to even get into the criminal justice system. And that's for Lorena. Lorena, it's okay if you unmute your mic if you want to now to talk to Dr. Engels about your question, and Dr. Engels, I'll let you answer that. So it's about budgeting.
So is the question referring to getting the kits processed? Because it sounds like she asked that question in the middle of a conversation. I wasn't sure the context.
Yes.
Dr. Vasquez?
Yes, that was one of the biggest things here in Puerto Rico. We had the problems with the budgeting. So they were not assigning specific budget to be able to either buy the kits, and to process them.
Oh, wow. So you don't even have a budget in Puerto Rico to have the kits to even have them used?
No, they use specific budget to be able to assign them to the criminal justice, because it's separate from the police. It's another department that handles the specific budget. So they didn't have it for the longest time, and they were running out of kits, and they didn't have the budget to be able to even buy them.
So you had the kits and no budget to test them, then you ran out of the kits, and now you don't have a budget to buy more kits and test the kits.
Correct.
Is that still the case?
It got better, but it's like really tough.
Oh my gosh. I don't even know what to say to that.
How about a fundraiser?
Yeah, we need a fundraiser, something. Who is it?
Right.
You don't know who's in charge of the budget for that?
She's located in another country, y'all,
right,
too.
That's what I'm trying to, that's where my mind is going. Is it a treasury issue? I don't know how that works.
She's in Puerto Rico, right?
Yeah.
So Puerto Rico is part of the United States.
It's US owned,
Yes.
but do you get the funding from our federal government?
Yes.
Yes.
And okay.
You know, Dr. Engels, I would think that she would probably have to get a hold of her congressman or woman, state senator or something to that effect, and get the ball rolling. I know there's some grant funding that was allotted for the testing of backlog cases. I don't know, and I'm not aware of grant funding for the purchasing of rape kits, but that's a tough one.
Now that there's a new administration and the focus is back on violence against women, I would definitely contact your elected official or contact the United States White House, the president, the vice president, You can go to their website, the website for the White House, and you can actually send an email to them and state what your concern is. They're usually very responsive.
Thank you so much.
That's really appalling. I didn't know that.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm very surprised by it. And all those things, oh my God, all those people who won't get justice. You know what I mean? That
I mean,
breaks
to
my
not even
heart.
have the kits, no budget to purchase the kits, that just, I
But
mean,
what
it's
does that
bad.
say? That's a bigger systemic issue.
You know, I wonder, listen, I'm Puerto Rican, right? I was born in New York, but my family, my heritage is Puerto Rican. And, you know, we are people of color, right? We're very proud people as well. And I think it has a lot to do with the culture also, and what is the norm in the communities there in Puerto Rico and in New York and things of that nature. A lot of people don't want to talk about sexual assault. It's like taboo in the Latin community that you hold that within. It's embarrassing. You don't embarrass the family by coming forth, and victims tend to hold on to these particular crimes and this trauma that occurs. And I'm wondering if it's just on a larger scale. I'm assuming, but I know my people and I know how they can be as well. And I'm hoping that that's not the case down in Puerto Rico.
I'd also like to suggest that you reach out to the National Organization of Sisters of Color Ending Sexual Assault. You can find them under sisterlead.org. And I've worked with them since, I believe, 2013. They do trainings for people all across not only the United States, but the territories. And so I've worked with people in Puerto Rico and Guam who have funding, and they can also direct you to where you can get funding if you don't have it. And that's Sister Lead, SISTERSLEAD.org.
You can also contact WAINN, WAINN.org. And they also can assist you if you are feeling that way. If anyone has been triggered in this, I want to give a trigger warning, because I know that we've talked about some heavy stuff. That is also an organization you can contact to get help. You can also contact menhealing.org and also malesurvivor.org. And RAINN, again, it is RAINN.org, but any college counseling center will also provide you with free low-cost services for you to get help. So I just want people not go and get help because they hear this and not, you know, and be sitting there with this, because that is a huge burden, and we've heard what can happen to you if that happens.
And let me also say, if something has happened to you and you feel uncomfortable going to the police or to a hospital, look and see if there is a sexual assault crisis center or a crisis counselor somewhere around that could assist you. They will walk with you into the police department. They will walk with you to the hospital. They will stay there with you. You don't have to be alone. There are people that will advocate for you on your behalf and will support you for all of your needs.
Also, if you're a child and you've been sexually assaulted in any way, Bikers Against Child Abuse actually provides you protection, going to court, going to get help. They protect you from the abuser. They've been at the Script Conference talking about that. You can look at the tapes on the Listen and Love channel on the Bikers Against Child Abuse talking about that. But that also is a protection for the kids. Can you imagine going to court and your abuser's there and there's big old bikers and like 20 of them on Harley Davidsons come to support you? How empowered do you feel? Right? So it's a wonderful, wonderful program. So I just don't want people thinking they're alone. You are not alone. And just watching this, you become part of the Script family and you can get help. Just reach out to us and we'll find some way. Any of us, Dr. Engels, Paul Acosta, Kandee Lewis, we will help you, because this is a burden that you should not have to bear alone, right? And we have another question in the chat. We have two. The first one, how does the Jane Doe law work? in California. Is that, and it's in California, is that the only state to have the Jane Doe law?
So since it was my question,
Thank you, Diana.
I will kind of expand a little bit. So how it's supposed to work is if you've been sexually assaulted, you could go to the hospital and you don't have to give your name or information. It's supposed to be designed where you can get the rape kit done without having to give all that information. And then they give you a number, and then what's supposed to happen is a few days later, if you decide, or a week later, or 2 weeks later, or a month, a year, you can turn in that number and say, you know what, you do want to go ahead and prosecute, and they have that number. And so they preserve all of that evidence in that rape kit. Now, the problem is what I've seen, and this is why I said I don't know if this is only a California thing or if this is other states. And then the other question is, I do see sometimes here in California, when the police come in, they have to okay the kit. They have to okay to go ahead and have the rape kit done. Now, a lot of times though, then the police are saying, well, you can't do Jane Doe, even though supposedly we have this law in the book. So I just wanted to know if you guys knew anything about this or collaborate. Maybe Kandee Lewis might know a little bit more because she is in California. I don't know.
Kandee, you gotta unmute yourself, honey.
I think I just muted myself. I'm sorry. Okay, so it does say that it is also in Wisconsin. I'm not sure of other states, but yes, it is definitely. And let me just read Wikipedia. John Doe and Jane Doe are multiple names used that are used when true names of a person is unknown or they're being intentionally concealed. So we want to make sure it's really about protecting that person. You may not want someone to know, especially if that person is a law enforcement or if they are also in the medical field or if they have any agency or publicity. So I'm not sure if it's in other places other than Wisconsin. I know it is actively used here in California. And if a law enforcement or someone tells you that you can't use it, they're wrong. Just know that they're wrong.
That's what I thought, but it's kind of hard when you got your because I was an advocate, a victim's witness advocate, and so it's kind of hard when you got your person here that's been sexually assaulted and they don't want to give their name and they want to go Jane Doe, but then you have an officer coming in saying, well, I'm not going to do the rape kit if you don't give me your name. And so it gets kind of entanglement. So I was just wondering if you guys had any clarification.
And
I would have just simply asked for another law enforcement officer. We have the right to say, I don't want you in the room. I would like someone else to come and assist me and support me. And as an advocate, you can say, can I see you outside? You can't be in here with this person. And you have every right to do that. And I know it's kind of difficult when you're dealing with a law enforcement officer and they are trying to use their authority, but you have just as much authority to say, get out, you do not belong here, and I want to see someone else. Bring your captain or sergeant or someone else in.
And you know what, though? Like, I just tell them to leave. I don't care. But but you sometimes you have to not care what people think to stick up for the survivor. But Paul, I want to ask you, that to me sounds like a power struggle, right?
Yeah, it does. And you know what? The power is with the survivor in this particular case. And that's unfortunate. Things happen. And like I said before, sometimes cops and detectives can be a little callous in their approach and insensitive. And in this particular case, and with these types of criminal cases, that should not happen. So I don't like that. I don't like the way that sounds. And I would kick the cop out as well, quite frankly.
This is exactly what a lot of survivors have shared, is that it comes down to the law enforcement or investigator at determining whether or not they're going to test the kit or do something with it. And now what I'm hearing is in the state of California, they're saying they're giving the okay to even approve a kit being completed. And that should not be within their jurisdiction to approve of.
And that's what I'm talking about when I mentioned earlier, policy. Right? It should be something statewide, national, that there should be no ambiguity about what to do. There should not be. All those cases, all those rape kits should be processed, and that should be a standard in law enforcement.
And there should be some training, some standardized training that every 6 months or every time some new people come into a department, that they must go through a certain number of hours of training and have advocates in the room talking to them about experiences.
I met with Assembly Member Lowe, who is, can't remember which district here in Southern California, and he had come up with an idea of charging everybody a small income tax fee that would go towards testing the backlog of California's rape kits. I'm wondering if we reached out to him to try to help with some legislation about addressing the fact that law enforcement in California is given the discretion to approve or disapprove greenlighting a rape kit, because that just is egregious to me.
I don't think it was I think it was that person. I really believe it was that person who decided that they're going to do whatever they wanted to do for whatever reason. That is so wrong and disrespectful. I've never heard that on a wide scale. We do hear it occasionally. So I think it is that particular person who made that decision.
Well, that's when you get the badge number and you go straight to the captain, right, Paul?
You know,
or the chief.
That's right.
Paul, what would be the procedure to do that?
So if you have a complaint against a police officer in the actions or the way your case it's two different paths, so to speak. But if you have a problem in which you're complaining or you think a case should have been handled differently, then you have the authority and the right to go to that person's supervisor. Now, it's very hard sometimes in some organizations to figure out who that is, but you can start off with the chief's office and they'll get that complaint routed appropriately. Now, if it's something to misconduct and of that particular nature, then you're dealing with internal affairs.
Captain Young, I see you sitting up on your chair. Do you have something to add to that?
Well, I'm just in agreement. Absolutely. It's ridiculous to have so many cases that haven't been investigated. So
yeah. And I invite people, we have a few more minutes for questions. You can go ahead and unmute your mic if you don't want to type them in and ask your question, or you can also put them in the chat. I have a question in case people may not have one, since I'm going to take advantage of your wonderful brains here. If I could give you a wand, right? And because I have this blue wand and I go tink, right? And all your dreams could come true about this subject. What would you want an ideal world to look like for this? I'm going to tink you first, Kandee. Tink.
Thank you. The ideal is that no one would ever be raped. Simple. It's very simple, that no one would ever be raped, that people would have agency over their body, that people would be respected for who they are, and that we would all be accepted no matter our shape, size, age, ethnicity, sexual orientation, our likes, our kinks, our freaks, whatever it is you like, I like. And so let's just learn how to be respectful of everyone.
I'm going to piggyback off that, everything she said, but I think also, you know, we talked early on about word choice and how words matter. and how calling people survivors versus victims, but it also boils down to how we communicate with each other on a regular basis. How men talk with women, how women talk with men, how boys talk with girls, what flirtation is, like just having a general respect for each other, for each other's differences, for each other's similarities, for gender differences, and just changing the dialogue. So there's a lot of even small things, you know, when we talk about violence against women, I think we need to start framing it's men's violence against women. And, you know, we need to start actually having those heavy conversations and also changing some of the words that we choose to use.
I would add everything that my fellow panelists have just said. Those are key points and very good ones. As far as in this particular topic, you know, what I would love to see is more empathy across the board from a basic law enforcement approach to this particular crime, that every victim would be treated with care and consideration and love, and that this particular type of crime is given the value and the importance that it deserves. And from the little research that I've done on it, I don't see that across the board. And it's important, they will get investigated, but when you're looking at the violation of another human being, we need to prioritize this quite higher on the scale across the board, across the country. And of course, you know, my own personal thing is there's a lot of things going on across America today, a lot of terrible things that have happened in the past year. And if there's anything that I can say about the law enforcement profession is that we've come a long way since the 60s, 70s, and 80s. Our training has gotten better. Our officers are better educated. But there's always a way to improve. And we in the profession are held to a higher standard. And we're expected to do better, be better, know better, perform better. And that is something that we're always going to have here. But we also have to have the other side of the conversation with our communities out there, those tough conversations, because there's always two sides to the story. And, you know, law enforcement is part of the community that they serve. They see everything and the good and the bad in the communities out there. And sometimes their paths are going to cross for one reason or another. And hopefully it's in a good way, but a lot of times it's not. But we have to have a good conversation nationwide about why our communities do what they do, feel the way they do, act the way they do, and why does law enforcement do what they do, and how, and look through the lens of both entities. And I think unless we're willing to come to the table and have those tough conversations, we're not going to move this country forward. That's my greater wish. And I hope that one day we can see it, at least in my lifetime.
We have one more question that came to me on LinkedIn, and I want to get it in there. What can we do for juveniles in this subject area?
So I'm going to attempt to answer that because I really don't know what context they're referring to. But the first thing that I would say is parents, have conversation with your children. Be honest about the conversation. And speak to them like they are their age, not like they're a kid. And don't use terminology that they don't understand. So make sure that you talk to them about consent and boundaries, what's appropriate and what's not. And if a child, a young adult, or anyone comes to you and says, this is what happens, as Dr. Engels and also as Paul has said earlier, make sure that you're listening. Make sure that you believe them. Deborah, you said that. And then make sure that you follow up. That is one of the things that I've heard people say, that they've told a parent or someone and no one did anything. It's almost like, okay, well, if we don't say anything, it didn't happen or it will go away. Know that violence and abuse does not simply just go away. And that once a rapist rapes someone, especially a child, the likelihood of them continuing to do it is extremely high, especially if that person lives in our home or has access to your children. And know that most times we teach kids about stranger danger. Don't worry about stranger danger. You need to worry about the danger that's in your house and those that have access to your children. So let's make sure that we do not put our children in harm's way. I've even heard of situations where a person has allowed someone to have sex with their child. First off, there's no such thing as a person having sex with a child. That's called rape, because a child cannot give consent. A person who is under a certain age can't give consent. So it is rape. And they said that they did it for because they would then have a safe place to live. But you did not allow that child to have a safe place. So make sure that when you are looking at things, you're looking at things rationally. And I know that sometimes we are dealing with trauma, and trauma makes us think differently. So you might want to have a case manager or a mental health therapist or someone that could help you to make informed decisions. And then last, I just want to lift Paul back up again and say that not everyone in law enforcement is bad, just like not everyone is bad and not everyone rapes. So we just have to remember that and make sure that we have conversation, because it's conversation and conversations such as these that will prevent and end violence.
That's right. Thank you.
I'd like to say it's really important with our juveniles that you create a safe place for them, a safe space for them at all times, that they feel like they can safely come to you with anything and everything that they have been experiencing, or that friends of theirs have been experiencing, things they've witnessed, so that they know that if they come to you, that they feel supported and believed. And I know that as a parent, if your child was to come to you and say, so-and-so did this to me, your first inclination is to get angry at that, what had happened and what happened to your child or at that person. But remember, like we talked about, that child is absorbing that reaction and feeling that they're responsible for it. So it's really crucial that in those moments, you make it about them and not about you, because it is not about you. It's not about how you feel, it's about how they feel. And so making sure that you always have that safe space for them where they feel going forward that they can always bring something to you and that you are a trusted and supported individual for them. And that's crucial.
Paul?
I would echo everything that my fellow panelists have already said, but to include just love your child, be open and honest with them, hug them and talk to them every day and share with them what are the most important things in life, and everything else would probably fall in place. They would be willing to talk to you about the most scariest things that they come across. So love your kids, have them trust, develop that trust mutually, and I think we're in a better place.
And, one of the things I want to add is let kids be kids. We want to grow them up. We want to socialize them to do all of these grown-up things in this world, right? I mean, when I was a kid, we didn't come in the house till the street lights were on, right? We weren't allowed, and now kids are in their homes, and I know it's COVID, but they're not interacting. They're not being kids. They're not bumping their knee and getting boo-boos, let them be children and stop sexualizing and socializing them on TV and social media to do things that are adult things. It's not cute to dress your child up as an adult woman and parade her in a pageant. I'm sorry. She should be playing with Barbies and getting giggly with her friends. And just like little boys, it's not cute to do that. And so please just let children be children. And some of this, not all of it, because we have people who have different mindsets than we do, some of this may stop because society's not saying, hey, it's okay to look at a kid that way because they're on TV that way. The messages we put in go into our heart and they go into our soul. And let's change what messages are going into our soul. And with my soapbox, We need to begin to wrap up. And so I'm going to give each of you 2 to 3 minutes to wrap up everything and what people want to hear, from you about how you felt about this and any takeaways you want people to take with them and take home in their little bitty pocket. Tristin?
I turn it over to the ladies first.
Oh, how sweet of you.
No, I just want to thank you, Dr. Warner, for having this conference, and Paul and Kandee for being a part of it, and everybody who's chimed in, who's joined in the conversation and is learning and being part of the change. I think that's the biggest takeaway for me. The whole reason I wrote the book as well is because I want to be a part of the change. I want to carry on the legacy, and I want to leave the world a little better than I found it. And if that means I can speak out and I can have these conversations and we can educate and we can connect, I'm here for it anytime. So I really appreciate that. And I'm really grateful to be here.
I am also grateful to be here. Thank you, Dr. Warner, Dr. Deborah Warner, Dr. Tristin Engels, and Paul Acosta. This has been an amazing conversation. You all have been right on point. What I want to leave people with is this. First off, know that if anything has ever happened to you, again, I want to apologize on behalf of just the world, the good part of the world, because it was not your responsibility. It was not your fault. And understand that how you reacted is normal. It is absolutely normal, and everyone reacts differently. We didn't talk about this real quick, so let me just say this. Sometimes people who have been raped or sexually assaulted feel like it is their fault because their body reacted. Your body got excited, you may have had an orgasm, any kind of thing like that. But let me just say this, because we are sexual human beings, our bodies will respond, whether it is something that we consent to or not. But because your body reacted does not mean that your body was acting against you. Your body was acting normally, and it was not your fault, so don't take it that way. Give yourself some grace. Let's hold the person accountable and responsible for the violence that they did to you. Also, understand that everyone reacts differently. So if a person comes to you and they are calm or they're excited, if they're telling you something, please believe them. Please do your best to believe them and get them the support and help that you need. And if you can't get them the support and help you need, reach out to any one of us here and allow us to assist and support you with the resources that we have or that we will reach out and achieve for you. And then, of course, if you can't talk to your kids, call me. I'll talk to them. I have those real talk conversations. And trust me, they will be informed, they will be knowledgeable, they will be excited about the information, because kids are people and they want to know. And if you do not talk to your kids, trust and believe somebody out there is. And the information that they're sharing with them is not necessarily the information you want your kids to have. So I'm Kandee, and I'm thankful to be here.
And I guess I'll bring it home, like Dr. Deborah says. Listen, to everyone that came on to this platform to listen to us speak and have conversation with you this evening, thank you for joining us. I hope that you got something out of today's panel discussion. And to my panelists, fellow panelists, Dr. Deborah, Dr. Engels, and my lovely Kandee Lewis. I've learned so much from you all as well. One of the things I live by is never stop learning. You always have room for improvement in your lives. I'm a people person. What you see here is what you get. I'm not that callous law enforcement person that perhaps we get painted the picture to be. And I just want to share that for me, having this opportunity to appear here before you and represent the law enforcement profession with some goodness, with some kindness, with some heart, I really do believe helps us bond as a community all the way around. So thank you for the opportunity. It means the world to me. I really hope that we work together again in the future. You guys have so much information and knowledge to share, and you're doing great things in your communities. And I do believe there's still a lot of work to be done. And I think if we continue to put our heads together, we'll make progress little by little. So thank you, and God bless you all.
Yeah, and you know what? I'm not done with you, Paul, because, I'm going to mute you for a second. I'm not done with you because script is July 16th and 17th here on Zoom, and you are all going to be presenting there because I talked to you about that. So don't back out on me now. And so please look for that on my social media at thescriptconference.com. You can also go to drdeborahwarner.net. You can find me on Instagram. It's Dr. Deborah Warner, or Facebook, Dr. Deborah Warner PsyD. But I want to give everybody here also an opportunity to tell us where to find them. And if you want any of the resources and Tristin's book or anything resources that we here talked about today, you can go to my Amazon store at Dr. Deborah's Things and More. And you can get all the resources for script. You can get script hoodies. You can get Dr. Deborah Warner t-shirts. But guess what? All of the proceeds for the script hoodies or anything pertaining to script go to doing things like this free to the community. So please support it. And please, please, please support our people. But each of you, tell us where to find you so that people know. And you can find this recording and the information on the YouTube channel, the Listen and Love channel, if you want more information and you cannot write it down. So Kandee, you're up first.
I love you. You have just so much energy. You just like full of life. You are, and if you all don't know her, she's like this all the time. So thank you so much, Dr. Deborah Warner, for inviting me. I am Kandee Lewis. You can find us at Positive Results Center, and that is www.prc123.org. You can also find us on Facebook at the Positive Results Corporation. We changed our name last year, still on Facebook like that, or facebook.com/PRC123. You can also find us on Instagram, same thing, at the Positive Results, as well as you can email us at info@prc123.org, and I will put all of that in the chat. And I look forward to hearing from you. I'm praying for you all. And please share this message with everyone, and go to Dr. Warner's YouTube and then share that video as well. Thank you.
So you can find me on Instagram. It's I put it in the chat, but it's Dr. Dr. Tristin Engels. And I have another one, which is Advocate. It's ADVOKIT as in kit _. And that Instagram handle, and that it's also a podcast where I talk about rape culture, and I talk about cases where sexual assault kits had not been processed and need to be processed. And so, yeah, you can find me on those two areas, and I respond to messages there as well. So yeah, please reach out.
Okay, and I'll bring it home. I'm still learning how to do work, so to speak. So I'm starting to get out there in little ways possible. But my Twitter handle and my Instagram is the same. It's Paul Acosta MBPD, which stands for Miami Beach PD. So that's Paul Acosta MBPD for Twitter and for Instagram. And my email is my full name, Paul Acosta @miamibeachfl.gov. Any questions, any follow-up, anything that of help that I can provide to you, please reach out and don't hesitate. I'll be more than happy to help and assist along the way.
And thank you, everybody. Kandee, my friend, my sister, I admire you. You know that. You are family. Tristin, you have been wonderful to teach, and I'm glad you are now my colleague because I can tell you all the little secrets. You know that. But I am so proud of you, my girl.
Thank you so much for all your support through the past decade, more than a decade. My goodness. Thank you.
Yeah. See, I never let people go. And Paul,
She does it. It's true.
Yeah. You are my newest love, and I am not letting you go. And he has
Each other.
hashtags. He has hashtags Chief Paul and Chief Paul Acosta. So
That's
please
right.
find him on LinkedIn and on Instagram. Okay.
That's right, I'm there too.
So everybody, listen and love. And guess what? We are a wrap. And presenters, please stay a few minutes, and you can find this probably tomorrow morning if you want to share it, and please do on Facebook and all the handles, because that's how we keep script free. Thank you so much.